Hello and welcome to episode 200 of A Link to the Cast, your weekly dose of video games and nerd culture ephemera. I am this week's compere. I am the platforming prodigy Mark Robinson, and I'm delighted you are here for this week's very special episode. Myself and Dave started this podcast back in 2015, partially the offshoot of another podcast I had called Analog Shtick, and partially because we spent enough time talking about games and other forms of entertainment that we figured we might as well make something productive out of it. I didn't think this would result in 200 episodes, our Game of the Year specials, a number of amazing guests, me moving to Ireland and living with Dave for 2 years, and much, much more. I genuinely love recording this show, and even more so during the banality of the pandemic that has gripped the world for over a year now. Preparing, recording, editing and uploading this show gives me a brief respite each week that is extremely therapeutic and rewarding. Of course, I have Dave to thank for being part of this journey with me, but I also need to thank Jack for joining us a little while back as our third host. With Dave and myself tackling all the usual problems that everyday life brings, Jack has kept this ship afloat on a weekly basis that just wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And without him, we wouldn't have reached episode 200 till Christmas 2021 at the earliest. I want to thank Bryan McNamara, who took over as co-host while I was away in China. That show may have grinded to a halt if I had not been here for those 6 months, so thank you. I also need to give a big shout out to Barry Murphy for his help with us during Game of the Year. Even though they are a time-consuming venture to record and produce, his insight and wisdom make those shows an easy highlight each year. I also want to thank all of our special guests over the years, a number of them you're about to hear shortly. I'm humbled enough to find 2 people to record weekly with, but having other people take time out of their lives to record with us is always incredibly rewarding. So, episode 200. As mentioned, we started this podcast back in 2015 during the 8th generation, one that was loaded with a phenomenal amount of great games from the underrated Wii U and a handful of Game of the Year contenders that would eventually find their way to a more popular platform and wider exposure, to Sony's exceptional first-party exclusives, to the gulf of incredible indie titles showcasing originality and creativity. There honestly has never been a better time to enjoy video games. Because of this, we simply couldn't do an episode restricted to the 3 of us talking about our favourite games of the last generation. But that is coming. And so we've brought in a number of special guests. These include friends, previous guests of the show, industry peers, all to talk about a favourite game from the 8th generation. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Here's to episode 300.
So when Link to the Cast asked me to talk about my favourite game of the generation, I sort of thought, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And to me, a favourite game of a generation needs to talk about what that generation brought that was different from all the other generations of games that came before it. So I'm going to talk about 2 games really quickly, Streets of Rage 4 and Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley, if we're being a bit of a stickler for the rules, that is probably my favourite game of the generation. But I want to talk about both of them very quickly because I think they provide an example of what I'm talking about when I say that they represent the generation really, really well. I feel like there's been a move back to established IPs, older properties, and going back into the archives to see what was valuable from the past that we can bring forward into the future. The PS4, Xbox One era, that is really on show. Re-releases, remasters, reimaginings, reboots, all of these things. These happened a whole bunch on that generation of consoles, and I feel like they were done properly. And there was a ton more of them. It always felt like there was a lot more of them this time around. So some really good examples of this would be stuff like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, Sleeping Dogs, Mafia. Those games got remasters, and I kind of never thought I would see them again because we'd never previously seen games of that kind of, high caliber, but not necessarily like, these exquisite, beautiful works of art. We never really saw them coming back ever again, and they've had these really good re-releases. But you also see a generation of consoles, especially, starting to kind of blur the line as to when one generation ends and another begins. You had your Xbox One, and then you had your Xbox One X, your PS4, your PS4 Pro. Equally, you had games that crossed across generations in just a way we've never seen before. So the classics are Minecraft, I mean, obviously, Skyrim making absolute bank and being available on almost everything. And, what's that? Yes, probably the most profitable video game of the entire generation. If not, I think it might be the most profitable game ever made. I have to double check that. But Grand Theft Auto 5 started on PS3. But on PS4 and Xbox One, that is where it really found its home and made all of that huge amounts of money. So you see that these older IPs, they're sort of like coming forward, being reimagined. Rattling them off: Hitman, Tomb Raider, Doom, Resident Evil, sort of Silent Hill, Cyberpunk. These are all examples of games where they've been reimagined, either their previous video games IPs and they've been brought forward, or they are IPs from other parts of culture. I'm thinking specifically Cyberpunk here was a tabletop RPG, and that's been brought into a modern video game. This is just something we've already known in games for a while, that it's much more risky to create your own original IPs in terms of finances than it is to create something based on an IP that's already well established. It's much cheaper and much less risky to make a game and say, this is a Halo sequel, than to make a first-person shooter with a Space Marine on the cover that plays exactly like Halo, but isn't actually attached to any of those brands or IPs, because you can rely on the Halo IP to bring in a certain amount of customers, but your Halo, but with the sort of, the numbers scratched off, you can't rely on those things. So Streets of Rage 4 is a really, that's a deep cut. That is something that I didn't think we would see for a really long time, and I suppose we didn't. And now we have a great one. Streets of Rage 4 is the best that Streets of Rage has ever been. Full stop. It's also probably one of the best 2D side-scrolling brawlers of all time, and this is coming from somebody who really didn't have, the biggest amount of love for Streets of Rage back in the day. It is incredibly skill-based. It is super nostalgic. It plays a lot of reverence in its soundtrack and its visuals and its callbacks to the previous games, but it's really forward-looking as well. This is a 2D brawler that actually requires real skill to get through it, rather than lots and lots and lots of credits being pumped into an arcade machine. It's also a game that is very clearly from a publisher that has a lot of money and from a team that really cares about this brand. It feels AAA, but it not in terms of its visual fidelity, because it doesn't look like an Uncharted. What it does is it packs its short single player story with tons of secrets, lots of content, lots of different enemy types, lots of explosions and effects, and amazing quality music, and just things that are very clearly very expensive moments of attention to detail that did not have to be done, but were, because clearly the team behind it really loves this, and obviously it's a sort of legacy brand. I played it co-op with a friend of mine who actually works at Sega, called Danny, and co-op gaming is also a thing that I think really defined part of this generation as well, in that playing online with people really has been a huge push, whether or not that's something through a traditional co-op-esque game like Streets of Rage 4, or these 100-player arena battle games. Multiplayer really has come to the forefront now, even so I would say more than the 360. And the other game I wanted to talk about was Stardew Valley, because it plays into this exact same thing, but it kind of comes at it from a slightly different angle and talks to a couple of other areas about what I think this generation is about. I think this generation is about players having more power than ever to influence the games that are made, whether or not that's something through something like Steam reviews, where a big red thumbs down is a really clear indicator to a person who is publishing a game that you are not happy, to social sharing, seeing all of those selfies on Twitter of Spider-Man at the top of the tallest building in New York. sharing the love or sharing your frustrations has never been easier for players. And I think that is an incredible change. And what it's done is it has built things like older brands coming back, or sort of adaptations or influenced by older games coming back. People have said for the longest time ever, wouldn't it be good if we went back to the original Harvest Moon kind of style of farming gameplay, myself included. And Natsume clearly was not prepared or willing to take the risk on making a game like that. And they've paid for it, because Stardew Valley has done incredible numbers. It's done absolute gangbusters across lots of different platforms. And now when we think about these kinds of games, we don't think of Harvest Moon, we think of Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley went from being a Harvest Moon clone to this is it. This is the game. This is the kind of game that you want to play now. See also Fast RMX if you want to play an F-Zero game, Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon if you want to play a Castlevania game, and if you really want to hurt yourself, you could have backed Mighty Number 9 on Kickstarter and got a game that was meant to be like Mega Man. But what that really shows is that the player has the power, not just through reviews and thumbs up and thumbs down and shouting at people online, which there's a lot of power there, and some of it badly used and some of it quite well used, but also through funding, Kickstarter and other crowdfunding platforms, allowing people to vote with their wallet ahead of time, to de-risk projects that were previously thought of as quite scary endeavors for big publishers with quite a lot to lose on legacy brands. Now these smaller teams have come up and actually made products based on those that scratch that itch on modern platforms. Stardew Valley also represents a game that is much more meditative, much more slower paced, and that to me is where I want to see games going a little bit more. Not as an entirety, I just want to see more of that space starting to open up. And I think, again, we saw that with this previous generation, where we have a much wider audience now, much in terms of age groups. Creatives have now just accepted that, hey, it's not just guys who play games. There are also different people from lots of other walks of life that are being catered to now in games. And it really all happened in that PS4, Xbox One generation, or a good chunk of it did anyway. So Stardew Valley also represents a different kind of game being made, harking back to an older experience that was quite rare back in the day, and actually embracing it for a modern audience that isn't necessarily just interested in headshots and dominating the competition anymore. Now they're interested in, I want to relax, sit back, chill out, do whatever I want, listen to an audiobook while I'm playing a game, having a very different kind of experience that's kind of lean back and relax with Stardew Valley, rather than a lean forward, your Halos and your Uncharted's and all of those kinds of games. I think that generation proved that there is room for both kinds to do really, really well. So if I had to choose one, I would say Stardew Valley. But Streets of Rage 4 and Stardew Valley together, I think, really expresses what the previous generation has brought to video games.
Hi everyone, so for my game of the generation, I'm going to talk about Fallout 4. So I've always been a long time Bethesda fan, particularly through originally the Elder Scrolls, Oblivion and Skyrim obviously, and latterly for this through Fallout 3 and especially New Vegas. I'm personally a huge RPG fan. I love a big meaty RPG game with lots and lots of hours of gameplay, lots to do, a character to grow from scratch into a powerful in-game being. So Bethesda have, for a long time in a lot of ways, despite a lot of the negative moves that they've made over the years, been a major player in this space. So obviously when Fallout 4 was spectacularly announced by Todd Howard, I got pretty excited. There were a lot of promises made, I think, back then for the game itself, which I felt in a lot of ways were ultimately delivered on to a certain degree, though we kind of forget now after the fiasco of Fallout 76 that was kind of a thing. So I came into the Fallout series really with New Vegas actually originally, and then backtracked to Fallout 3. I did try the original Fallout 1 and 2, but I am terrible at those tactical isometric games. So really the move to the FPS style in Fallout 3 really suited me, and I love kind of a third person view to be able to see kind of on my character the visual customizations you can do, the gear you're carrying, etc. I did try and go back and play Wastelands 2 when it came out to see if I could relearn how to play a game like the classics, and no, I can't. I'm so very, very bad at them. To jump right into it then, with Fallout 4, starting point would really be, I think, the graphics, because I think that's significant, certainly in the context of the series. For Fallout 4, the graphics, while they were fairly outstripped as the console generation wore on with games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or God of War, Detroit Become Human, at the time, and certainly in the context of the series, the graphics were effectively cutting edge, the best they've ever been. If there was more than one color tone compared to the vomit green grey of Fallout 3 or the poop brown of New Vegas. So visually it looked great. Your character didn't look photorealistic, let's be fair, but less uncanny valley than the weird plastic monsters of New Vegas or Fallout 3. Often, like I've listened to a lot of reviews and read a lot of reviews for Fallout 4, certainly at the time and since, and I do sometimes wonder that the character creator at the start of the game doesn't really get enough credit when compared to certainly its predecessors within the series and within the RPG genre, or even games since with RPG elements or RPG lights or some element of character customization. I mean, there's a lot more detail there than here are 8 preset heads, pick a hairstyle. So, like, I've always enjoyed, and even on replays and new saves, to spend quite an amount of time tinkering and tweaking with my character's look, even though you won't necessarily be looking at it for most of the game. Then, in terms of itself and the gameplay, I personally never found much in the way of kind of technical issues or errors, aside from, the classic Bethesda bug fest. But I've always been lucky, personally, on that score. Moving on, I suppose, to talk about kind of the gameplay, in line with kind of what I would have considered the cutting edge character creator of the time, the crafting and general visual customization is really worth calling out as something praiseworthy. They showcased it, I recall, at I think E3 with Todd, and the ability just to finally take all that junk that they've been populating Fallout games with and make use of them. Bunch of tin cans, some wonder glue or duct tape, a bit of copper wiring, and you've got scopes, silencers, stocks, magazines, and most importantly, like for me anyway, the visual representation of your guns or melee weapons or armor would change to match that, and generally just look quite good. The art design I felt was really good, really fitting in with the theme of it, taking it a little bit less fantastical. I think it's worth mentioning definitely that it had the best shooting in the series by a long way, the best shooting in combat. Even with VATS still in there, VATS became kind of less essential, I think, to combat. Certainly with 3 and New Vegas, if you didn't want to die fairly gruesomely and awfully and frequently, you were very dependent on VATS. Less so in Fallout 4, which I think was definitely a good growth point for the series and for the game. And for the world itself of post-nuclear war Boston, like, the world felt big and not empty but populated. Like with any of these games, there's a lot of emphasis placed on the freedom of how you play, so you can really just wander off away from the main path, or take your time in places that others might breeze through, and certainly it was always worth your time to do that. So there was stuff to do, random encounters, things to loot, everything now that you can loot, every piece of junk being worth looting, and it being worth taking your time. I've never been one for speed runs personally, but certainly with Fallout 4, genuinely there wouldn't really be a point, I don't think, to speed run that game. A proper example of it's the journey, not the destination. Certainly to kind of talk about the freedom of choice within the game compared to Fallout 3 and New Vegas, and certainly a lot of other RPGs, but especially those two, I was really pleased that they ditched a lot of the restrictive setups in the name of having consequences within the games. So, like with Fallout 4, you can do pretty much everything. You can recruit every companion. You can play along with every faction up until the main quest point of no return, so to speak. So you can advance and get to really experience all the story options and the gameplay that's on offer. Get all the faction specific loot you can get, and then after putting it off for a very, very long time, in my case, make your choice of who you're going to back to take down the Institute. Whereas you'll know in previous Fallout games, it's much more restrictive. So it's very much a kind of either or. So pick one faction at the start and lose access to another. Pick one companion. You can't pick up that other companion. As someone who likes to get the most out of it and explore every corner of the game and get as much of the game completed as possible on a single playthrough without needing multiple ones, even though I do many multiple playthroughs, that's a real positive development for me in terms of this series growing and advancing. The stories itself I found incredibly engaging. Like, yeah, you do, like with any RPG game, and especially any Bethesda or Fallout RPG game, you do tend to wander off after a while and forget about your main quest to kind of spread out laterally and explore the world and do the side quests. Because to be fair, Bethesda have always been pretty strong on side quests. Are engaging, they are interesting, and ultimately they're quite rewarding, in their own ways, be it with gear, loot, advancement, or just the satisfaction of solving a mystery or completing a story. I think as well it's really worth mentioning too the high points of the quests within Fallout, in particular the cinematic moments that they crafted into it. The first time you get power armor and fight the Deathclaw is just a real kind of high point within those cinematic moments. The arrival of the Pridwin in the sky after you fight Kellogg, you exit Fort Hagen, and there it is. You're not dragged into a cutscene to look at it, but it's you can't tear your eyes off it. So to wrap this up, I suppose, as a casual gamer with not a lot of leisure time, my backlog of unplayed or unfinished games is long, and with things like Game Pass, it's only getting longer. But when you're gripped by the ennui of what to play next, I still find plenty of joy in booting up what is now an old favourite to rediscover all over again the universal truth that war never changes.
Hi everybody, welcome back. Episode 200, A Link to the Cast, and this is where we're letting the people that we love and the people that are around us and the people with the knowledge in our lives take over this 200th episode and talk about some games that have meant a lot to them in this last generation. And I'm very excited to have my next guest with me, who is a man I've known for a very long time and very good friends with, and is single-handedly responsible for the success of the Disney Corporation. He is one Daniel Newman. Dan, how are you today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Jack. Thank you for having me on. I cannot take credit for the success of the Disney company in any regard at all, really. But thanks for that introduction. That was nice.
Yeah, no worries. I joke with Dan here because Dan is a very multi-talented man. Aside from being, intelligent, handsome, all of the above. Dan, you managed to get your name in the credits of a few Marvel films back there. Do you want to just give everyone a brief overview of how that happened?
Yeah. So I used to work in a comic book store called Golden Age Collectibles, the best comic book store in all of Canada. Some might say.
Vancouver represent. Yep.
Oh yeah. And during that time, a good customer of mine, they saw me working 12 hours a day for 8 hours pay, and they said, "Do you want to work that long and get paid for it on this thing called Spider-Man?" And I pretty much pissed my pants on the spot, and it was made.
Yeah. As a lifelong like fan of Spider-Man, you know, it's kind of the sort of thing where you're watching a film and like someone's the person in a shop or whatever, and then someone comes in and answers all their dreams. Like you're basically like Lady Gaga in that movie of Bradley Cooper, just noticing her that one time. So yeah.
And just like Gaga. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people would say that.
The great thing of, you know, Spider-Man was like my favorite superhero as a kid, and I've been in, you know me, I've been into comics all the way into adulthood, so it felt great. And not only that, but I've always felt like a strong connection to New York with my music taste and everything. And even there was this one time, I went to New York and got food poisoning and pooped myself in Times Square at Christmas time.
Nice.
But this is my first time on a podcast, and I just felt like I wanted to tell the world that.
I love that it's like, you know, you've worked on like all these super things, but you're like, no, I need to get that I shit myself in Times Square story out there.
Yeah, it's because I can't, like, the fact that I worked on those things, I do think it's cool and they mean a lot to me, but I don't want to be bragging. So, you know, as long as people know that, yes, I worked on those movies and that was pretty cool. I also did poop myself in Times Square at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Don't eat at Popeye's Chicken in Coney Island, because
Popeye's Chicken is fucking awesome. Is what I've heard. From unconfirmed sources.
That was uncanny. I did not know that you can do the little Nicky thing.
I don't crack it out very often, as you can imagine. We are here to talk about your favorite game from the last generation. Now, as a man who's sort of like moved around the world, over to Vancouver to chase down dreams and big city living and stuff like that, how much of the last generation games did you play? Did you get to as many as maybe when you were younger, or is it like a bit more limited?
To be honest, it's a lot more limited. This is the generation where I honestly feel like I fell off of gaming a lot. And it wasn't even to do with what was on the market or anything. It was mostly just to do like where I was at the time and my work schedule and stuff like that, attention spans and so on. So I've only really been able to dive in, and maybe I could count on one hand the amount of games I've finished in this generation. But I think I've been pretty good with what I've selected and stuff. Yeah.
So now the time has come for you to reveal, what was your favorite game of the last generation?
Okay. I'm worried I'm going to be seen as like a basic bitch for this. You know, I don't know what the gate is like in gaming and which ones are cool and stuff. But for me, it was Red Dead Redemption 2.
A good choice, sir. I don't think there's anything basic about that. I spent quite a lot of time cutting some serious positive promos on how emotionally moved I was by Red Dead 2. But just as an overarching sort of thoughts on the game, like what did this game kind of mean to you and when you were playing it, and how did it have an effect on you?
Okay. So I guess for me, being more of a casual gamer and taking extensive breaks from gaming, when I first loaded it up and started walking around, I was like, okay, this is what a next generation experience is. Like the level of detail and just, you know, interaction with the environment and everything. But what I left out is the reason I bought a PS4, partially for Spider-Man PS4, because I'm a giant dork. We've mentioned Spider-Man already, and
respect
twice in maybe 5 minutes. But also because Red Dead Redemption 2 was coming out, because before that, the first Red Dead Redemption was my favorite game of all time.
Yeah.
So this had a lot riding on its shoulders to live up to. And I guess, you know me, you know the comics I'm into, the films I'm into. I love morality tales. I love morality tales so much. And
yeah,
it was one of those things. I think, Rockstar are incredible at what they do in terms of, you know, these giant experiences. But, you know, it was always so jarring in a GTA where within the story, it was like, you know, you got to do this thing because it's the right thing to do. And there's like a moral compass being shown. And then, you know, you can just walk out and slaughter 20 people with a flamethrower and there'd be no kind of repercussions.
Yeah.
But, you know, like it's always been the point of like, you know, the Red Dead Redemption series, right? These bad men trying to make amends in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you, it's one of those games as well with the, like, there's like a literal measure for your
Yeah.
moral compass, like right there on the screen. So like imagining like a guy growing up with like real tales of, like you say, morality and wanting to be a hero, when you're playing it, like that's got to have that an instant appeal, that it's like not only has somebody gamified those choices, but they've actually turned it into part of the game itself. And it's like you can see the data of how much of, you know, of a good impact you're having on the world around you right away. That's got to be satisfying, right?
And when you do, you know, maybe you shot someone that you shouldn't have shot, or you killed a witness, and then you just get that bar go down and you get that tiny musical cue. You're like, yeah, that wasn't right.
Yeah,
That
heartbreaking.
Yeah. And just, you know, just talking about protagonists, it was well, first of all, I played the game probably in two chunks, and I took a break of 6 months in between. And that was just the way, the mindset I was in at the time. But I remember when I first started, I was not really fond of Arthur Morgan as a protagonist. He did not resonate with me at the beginning.
So like you're saying, initially you didn't feel that same connection. So I agree with you. That's something that I think when I first started playing the game as well, because like John, you're so connected to him, and you know, like the whole narrative and the way it goes with him and his son and stuff. So it is a bit of a shock at first with Arthur, because he doesn't seem to have any like real kind of personality traits, and a lot of the early narrative of the game is kind of letting you make up your own mind. But it grows, right?
Definitely. And that's what the incredible job of you know, the writing team on that game did, because they introduced me to a protagonist that I didn't like at the beginning. He was, you know, in a gang with the protagonist that I loved previously. Yet at the beginning of the story, I just started to detest John. I was just seeing, like, you know, kind of like deadbeat dad, kind of not being responsible for his actions. And then I started warming to Arthur, and I thought, wow, this guy's pretty great. And then just by the end of the game, and sorry, can we talk about spoilers? I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and look, spoiler alert, but it is like a 3-4-year-old game now. So come on, people, why haven't you played it yet? Go play.
Do it. But then just the way everything goes towards the end, and you regain control of John, and you're trying to do the right thing. I mean, yeah. So they made me detest this previous protagonist that I loved, and then I learned to love him again, and I just thought that was incredible. Like, and none of it felt jarring or out of character or false. It all lined up with that game that came 10 years before. And yeah, I thought it was phenomenal. You know what? Early on in the game, as Arthur, I found like one of the greatest horses I could find, and I named it after a song that I loved at the time. And
Barbie Girl, the horse.
Exactly, yeah, Barbie Girl. Easy girl.
Yep.
And then I kept that horse for the entirety of the game. And if you try and be the good guy, if you try and do the right thing, your horse gets shot at the end, and you have to go execute it, like put it out of its misery. And I was broken, and I was so saddened by that. It reminded me of like I Am Legend, you know, not a great movie, but when Will Smith chokes his dog out, it was like, oh my god, this is so painful. And now when I listen to that song, I think of my poor dead virtual horse.
Yeah, Barbie Girl, gone too soon.
Yeah.
R.I.P. to a real one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that's the thing that game does so well, I think, is that sort of translation of people's journeys and their arcs, and you know, like as you get closer attached to it, everything starts to breathe more life and more resonance into every mission towards the end of that game. It feels like a momentous occasion. Arthur's decision after he knows that he's gonna die and stuff like that, it's just it's huge, man, and they do it so well.
Like, and there are little hints, obviously, but then when that comes, it's a punch in the face. You don't expect that, and yeah, it changes the whole narrative towards the end. It's so well done.
Yeah, agreed. Was there anything that like you didn't like about the game, or any little things that you might improve or tweak or make better?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where it felt like too much, to be honest. The map is so huge and extensive, and especially when you're traveling mostly by horseback, it can be a slow kind of. It can be disengaging after a while. You know, they need to keep you interested in. They did such a great job with like the random occurrences happening in that world and like all the wildlife and everything. Like AI of it is so incredible. But I was disappointed there wasn't, you know, single player DLC, because I thought you could take smaller stories, keep them contained to certain points of the map, and actually really flesh it out. You know, sometimes I feel like less space but more interactivity with your environment would be a lot better.
It's one of the common criticisms, I guess, of the game, is that like some people can like the very deliberate way you say you get on and get off a horse or open a door, everything, like it's so hyper realized, and it's a real creative decision that Rockstar have made. And I think some people, you know, might have struggled with it. And you know, like, you know, when I play old games, sometimes they have the thing where you can like even stick a fast forward mode on and play through it quicker. And I do just think that generally, like the mentality of things, like, you know, even Netflix has fast playback on it and stuff now. So I do think that maybe if Rockstar say they ever repackage this, they might put that option in there for you to have a faster gameplay and stuff. But yeah, like these things are kind of quite, you know, quite minor knocks on what is otherwise like a fantastic game, I would say. And
that negative, I just want to spin into a positive, because again, one of the things I love so much about it is the pacing, is the nuance, it's like letting it breathe. You know, like sometimes you'd get off like finishing in a crazy mission where something explosive happened in the storyline, and then you're just kind of stranded in the middle of nowhere, and you have to just like slowly climb that horse and get riding off into the distance, and then you think about what just happened, and like the musical cues as they kick in, it's just like, I feel like a lot of games have shifted towards, you know, going towards that cinematic experience. You know, you get like the quick time events and the big blockbuster scenes and stuff like that. But I think this tried to do the cinematic experience in a very more quiet way. Just the atmosphere of it all, and yeah.
Yeah, man, I completely agree. You definitely have a full support in this choice from me, I would say. Just two quick questions to wrap it up. First one, is there any game, like literally PS5's the hottest commodity on the planet right now, and you know the next gen is like very difficult to buy into at the moment, but there's not a huge lot available. Is there anything that is coming to next gen that has piqued your interest, would you say?
Kind of funny, actually. Yeah. I am, of course, super excited about like the full-on Spider-Man sequel when that happens. That would be great. And you know, I'm excited about these rumors about like the GTA 3 kind of anniversary thing. But the thing that caught my eye, and I said I'm going to buy a PS5 when that comes out, is Stray.
Oh, okay, cool.
You know, the little game where you're in, was it futuristic Hong Kong? There are no humans left, and you're playing as a little cat that's just running around.
It looks brilliant. The I popped so huge for the trailer when it came on. I think it was E3 or the Game Summer event thing, but we talked about it, and yeah, you're just like, yeah, there's cats, and it looked so cool, like the way they're interacting with each other. It looked like somebody had taken Cyberpunk and Aristocats, the Disney movie, and like fused them together.
Exactly. And I don't know, I'm a big part that's riding on it for me is I want customization for the cat, because I really want to make my own cat and play as him whilst he cries for food and I just ignore him. I just want to run around Hong Kong.
Yeah,
I want to injury.
I can't look after my real cat right now. My fake cat is hungry and I need to feed him.
Yeah, and it needs to, you know, manipulate these robots into doing its will or whatever.
Exactly. Wall-E for cats.
So that's the big one for me. But also, speaking of Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm still super pissed that there hasn't been an Undead Nightmare expansion for that, because that was one of the things I loved about the first one, was just flipping it into a horror story and survival horror. Like, there's so much potential there for that. So that would also be very lovely. I doubt it's going to happen, but
there's like the whole murderer side quest in there where you were seeing some like gruesome crime scenes and stuff, and I think that sort of hint at like something darker and more twisted in the game. I felt cool.
Well, you find like a cult, like the remnant cult hideout, and like everyone's dead, and there's talk of an outbreak of like insanity and stuff like that, and I'm like, don't tease me like that, you know. Like, Give it to
Yeah.
me now. It's me on a plate. I keep saying give it to me. I'm not going to say it anymore.
Yeah,
Uh,
otherwise, unfortunately for you, I'm creating a soundboard of you
oh
saying that.
God.
Yeah.
Are you just going to put a beat behind it and make it a cover of that old Jay-Z song?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Give me that
Wait.
thump, that sweet, that nasty stuff, or whatever. However, anyway, quickly moving and transitioning to my final question. My final
Yeah.
question is, if there were to be a sequel to Red Dead
Mm.
2 now, which is weird because it is a prequel, so you're
Yeah.
kind of like the sequel to Red Dead 2 is Red Dead Redemption. So if there was going to be a follow-up to Red Dead Redemption, or they even go even further back, what would you want from it, and what would be, do you think, an interesting thing that they could do with it? Like if you were like in Dan Houser's ear right now, would you be saying,
Yeah.
like much like you were for all of the creative decisions on Avengers Endgame, what would you be suggesting that they do to make this game awesome?
I was involved with zero creative decisions on that movie, but
Yeah.
I would love to claim anyway. Anyway, I would not go further back. I would make it a sequel to Red Dead Redemption, because I think we can all kind of agree that in the first Red Dead Redemption, when you take over as Jack Marsden, it's kind of annoying, bit of a whiner, and you don't get much time with him. And I think it would be a great way to, like Rockstar did with John. They made me like him, they made me hate him, they made me like him again. I think they could do wonderful things with that character and just like the overall legacy of that story. And then it would turn into like this big Ouroboros of it eating itself. But then also, I just feel like with the introduction of the modern age, like just starting to bring in like cars and stuff like that at that period, you could freshen it up with some more mechanics and stuff like that. There's that, but I think I also mentioned, like, I was kind of saddened by no single player DLC. Like when you get Sadie right off south and Charles right off north, there could have been great deal. Like, what if you had Charles in Canada and then you had Sadie in Mexico, and just like a small contained story of each of them would have been wonderful, because they were both such great characters as well. Like that's also a thing. A sequel, if you play as Sadie, would be fucking brilliant.
Oh yeah, Sadie's like one of the best things about Red Dead Redemption 2. She's a fantastic character. They nailed it with her.
Kind of my perfect woman,
Yeah, Sadie rules.
Sadie
Anyways, so Dan, thank you very much for coming on this here episode 200 of Link to the Cast. I wanted to have you on, talk about some shit forever, because Dan's a really insightful guy, and I like his opinions a lot, and we started getting some good ones there. At some point in the future, mate, we'll have to have you on and have a little bit of a chat about some stuff, some video games.
I'll play more games, and then we can talk more.
Yeah, exactly. When Stray comes out, I'm ringing you up. I'm getting the 411 from you, my friend. Awesome, dude. Thank you so much for coming on Link to the Cast episode 200. You're one of the good ones, sir, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, mate.
Hi, I'm Jeff Tanton from Mediatonic, and my favourite game of the last generation was Disco Elysium. I started playing Disco Elysium a little into lockdown last year as summer approached and the reality of it all was setting in. Like most people at the time, I think we all felt a little untethered from reality. We all lacked a collective frame of reference for what we were going through, and we were all suddenly disconnected from each other in a very literal sense. Given this, I was super melancholy, anxious as hell about the world and forthcoming release of our game, and feeling particularly unhappy with myself. So, of course, it was the perfect state to jump into the story of a self-destructive catastrophe detective, and picking both a murder case and his recent apocalyptic-level bender on a bleak little spit of simmering tensions, the island of Revachol. I didn't know any of that when I went in. I only knew it was a CRPG, and it looked distinctive and noirish, and it was cheap on Steam. Disco Elysium floored me. It delivered an endless series of what I can only describe as tender, necessary, but still deeply painful emotional gut punches. And before I knew it, I was a wreck and doing a big ugly cry, something I hadn't been able to accomplish for the past 15 years, despite at points really needing to. Even now, almost a year on, I struggle to understand exactly why that moment where I cracked was the moment where I cracked. It was an innocent thing, wondrous, dangerous, joyful, towards the very end of the game. Talking about it in any more detail would A, be a massive spoiler and perhaps prevent another from experiencing that moment in quite the same way I did, and B, have me sounding like that boy with the camcorder and plastic bag in American Beauty, and that's really something nobody ever needs in their life again. So instead, I'll do a quick list of things that I think mark Disco Elysium as a very special piece of art, and then cap it by explaining, for me at least, the moment that I fell in love with it and why I think it exemplifies everything special behind the game. Disco Elysium looks beautiful. The world art is painted in incredible detail where required, and impressionistic swathes of colour where it is not. And the two merge seamlessly into one another, dreamlike and unreal. Revachol is an Eastern Bloc-esque port town covered in snow and stone. It's a world rendered largely in grayscale, the points of life and colour and light punctuating its bleakly fascinating landscape. It felt both familiar and, at least for an RPG setting, completely new. More than anything else, it felt real. The role-playing system is simple, understandable, and leads hard into exposing the full transparency of that system. Every time you're able to passively add a bit of extra context or knowledge to a conversation or examination, the game flags exactly where that came from, seamlessly. The fact that this is applied to some degree across 20 skills for every single dialogue and examination across the entire game is still fairly mind-blowing to me. When you actively try to use skills, it's all solved through a simple 2d6 roll. The game will also helpfully let you know whether this is a roll you can attempt again at some point, or whether you will only get one chance to make the roll. Informed decisions, less regrets, more chance to tell the story you want and decide what things to place importance in. As indicated, Disco Elysium is incredibly well written. From the moment your ancient reptilian brain starts mocking you out of a drunken coma in its dark, gravelly drawl, it shows a flair and confidence in what it's doing and where it's taking you. The conversation trees are myriad and dense and not for everyone, but I often found myself exhausting all of the chat options just to glean a little more about the world around me and the people in it. Because Disco Elysium is also very funny, it is incredibly bleak and sad and often hopeless, but my God, does it understand how to pull out the moments of hilarity within that. A huge amount comes from the slow uncovering of all your poor decisions made during the drunken night before the game begins, the barman's barely concealed disdain, the mystery of who stole your car, the audacity of the stolen leg armour heist, Kim's ability to say so very much through saying absolutely nothing. Which brings us to Kim and my reason for loving this game more than anything else I've played in the last generation. The development of the relationship between your character and the militia lieutenant who is assigned to you, Kim Kitsuragi, is a rare and blessed thing. If the people of the internet have anything to say in this, then there's a decent subsection who ship these two. I can totally see it. My playthrough didn't feel that way, but only because, in my opinion, despite how much Harry made efforts to improve, Kim could absolutely do 100% better. What sat at the heart of the relationship and the moment the game just flipped for me were the acts of kindness. Kim is, at heart, a kind character. This is a trait so often wrapped up in naivety or innocence in other games, in other media, but Kim is nobody's fool. He is a deeply capable man who loves his car and is tasked with babysitting a travesty of a human being. On the first night after you wake up, you have nowhere to stay, you have no money, and the barman at the hotel quite rightly wants you gone. Then Kim, who's only just met you and has clearly got the measure of you from the start, gives you the money out of his pocket to pay for your room that night. You are in no way deserving of this. You have learned more than enough about your behaviour. You are an impediment to his work. And yet, I think I spent the rest of the game trying to live up to the expectations that this NPC had in me. This belief through Kim's careful prodding and encouragement that you could be a better person. I stopped in-game drinking then and there, despite the potential short-term stat boosts. No, I think. Kim will know. And so we push through, and you learn that his sight isn't as good as it was, and you can help out. And you have moments like the investigation of the body where you do police work together and bond through this fleeting moment of professionalism. The care with which he leads you to the realization about the car. The fact he knows how to dance, and how far you'll go at the end, and perhaps how far he'll go for you. I have no idea if someone playing Disco Elysium will get half as much out of it. I suspect they will. But like the best films, best music, best games, Disco Elysium feels like it was made for me. Which is a wildly egotistical take when you think about it, but entirely honest. That final section I mentioned earlier, the bit where I cracked, it has nothing to do with Kim. Not really. Then I think perhaps it has everything to do with him. You should play Disco Elysium, and then let's talk endlessly about it.
Hi there folks, this is friend of the show Keith Broni, and my favourite game of the last console generation is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch. Now, the Zelda game series, of course, is one of the most famous in the history of video games, but for me personally, I had only ever really fully interacted with the namesake of this podcast, the Link to the Cast Zelda game on the SNES, which I played despite not having a SNES through means I won't go into detail on that were available to me as a young teenager. But when I was growing up, I was very much so a PlayStation kid. So even though Zelda was on my radar through Link to the Past and friends that had N64s, but I'd never personally owned any of the 3D Zelda games. And that, of course, includes the very well-regarded Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time. And I actually happen to have party host David Ryan's 3DS remastered copies somewhere, which I probably should get around to playing at some point in the near future. It's not like I haven't, like the rest of the world, had an abundance of free time recently for a reason we won't get into. But when I was fortunate enough to get myself a Nintendo Switch, I got it as a gift about a year after the console's release. Breath of the Wild was the very first game I knew I wanted. It obviously had been incredibly hyped, but even still, it absolutely exceeded my expectations. It's quite trite to say this when talking about Breath of the Wild, but it is true. The absolute level of freedom that this game gives the player, in my experience, was completely unprecedented. At the same time, using those words, in my experience, is a little amusing because I had actually completely missed out on the previous generation of consoles. I hadn't had a PlayStation 3 or an Xbox 360. The last console I'd actually personally owned was a PlayStation 2. So the playing of Breath of the Wild was effectively like my big personal return to gaming. And I don't think I could have had a better experience with a different game. The Switch obviously is an incredible piece of hardware in how it operates, being able to dock it in to your TV or bring it around in handheld mode. And I tell you, nothing passes a dreary hour-long bus in and out of a city centre during a morning commute to and an evening commute from work than losing yourself in the absolute immersive world of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. And that freedom to wander effectively wherever you want once you've finished a reasonably short kind of tutorial space in the Great Plateau is just breathtaking. And as well as that, the way in which the environmental and elemental systems of the game are so incredibly consistent. It's genuinely awe-inspiring to be able to start to use elemental weapons or certain weather conditions to change different interactions with enemies or puzzles, and to have those elements of interactivity be consistent throughout contexts where they probably weren't even intended to be utilized, such as some of the puzzles in the various shrines across Hyrule, how you can, yes, take the expected path to solve the puzzle, where you'd use the various rune powers that you can obtain to, move objects or freeze objects and kind of impart momentum into them, but to be able to channel electricity through metal objects instead of using the intended kind of block object within a puzzle. The creativity on display is just incredible. And maybe more players, better players than I, were able to kind of figure out a lot of these things early on and choose all the different ways you can approach encounters. For me, I was constantly discovering these things through kind of ramshackle, all-in approaches in on groups of enemies, and then to see how the environment would kind of throw something unexpected at me was always just a joy to behold. And talking about unexpected things being thrown at you, this game, yes, you're so free to explore, but I've never really experienced a game with as much rewards on offer for that exploration. Because unlike other games I've played since that have an open world where once you've activated the tower, which is clearly an open world game trope now, the game doesn't give you every single side quest object on the map straight away. It lets you just see the kind of geography of that area, and then it really encourages you to just go around and see what you'll find. And there is always something interesting hidden in various nooks and crannies across the world, and every single hour you're finding something new to interact with, something that's not quite what you've seen before. Different enemy behaviors, different, again, environmental circumstances, different people wandering around in the kind of politely post-apocalyptic setting. These things all really breathe a lot of life into a world that is at times a little sparse on the surface, but there's so much depth hidden in every little nook and cranny of the overworld, and every little area can have something more to reveal itself to you if you just decide to roll up your sleeves and kind of dig into spaces across the map that you haven't gone into before. There's obviously as well such a variety of different side quests that you can explore on, and of course interacting with the main narrative of the game. When it is so non-linear, you can get some awkward circumstances like the one I had myself, where I ended up kind of stumbling into one of the kind of main 4 areas of the world and the kind of main narrative, the Zora's Domain, kind of in a very unexpected route, way earlier than the game had, technically loosely intended me to go there. I was very underpowered, but still kind of fought my way through to be able to complete that domain. And then when I finally kind of got back on track to go up to visit the kind of scientist character whose name I can't recall at this moment, I just realized how difficult I had made things for myself by just kind of going off and exploring. But at the same time, I valued that so much more because it was my choice to go do that. And the game, although it had set me in a certain direction, at no point, again, after you finish that initial training area, does it say, no, you can't do that. Yes, you have to perhaps get a little creative with how you interact with the world, but it just is completely unfettered exploration at its finest, with systems that are creative and consistent, be they, again, the elemental weapons, the cooking system, the way everything just feeds into this world that feels like it is consistent with itself. And it's not just a series of isolated gameplay mechanics, but instead are part of one big, beautiful quilt of gameplay. I absolutely adored every second of it, up until the point where I genuinely began to get frustrated at one point, maybe 2 months after I began playing it, every single hour to and from work on my my daily commute. And I was like, well, I'm beginning to feel like this is starting to wear a little thin now. I mean, that's very disappointing. But then I realized I had played the game for 150 hours at that point. And only then was I beginning to go, things are getting a little repetitive here. And I kind of had to stop myself and go, you know what? The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild owes you nothing, Keith. You have had such an incredible time for a hugely extensive amount of time. This game has been one of the best video game experiences that you've had in your life, and you're going to treasure those memories. And I do, and that's why The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of the previous generation.
And we are back. Episode 200 of Link to the Cast. Continuing on with our guests, our friends, our video game associates and consigliere, and what their favourite games of the previous generation was. Now, my next guest is a father. He's a lover. He's a pretty big wheel down at the school factory. It's Matthew Niner. How you doing, Matt? How's it going?
Yeah, I'm okay, thank you.
Now, Matt, I have known you since the tender age of 11 years old, when we met outside of maths class, I believe,
Cool.
all those years ago. And over the years, we've spent many a time talking about films, music, what we would do, you know, if we were like voted president of the universe and shit, any of that stuff that we've talked about and mused about. What are your early video game memories in kind of reference to our relationship and how we first got started talking about games with each other?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how it happened, but it turned out that we both had Final Fantasy VIII at the same time, having both not played Final Fantasy VII, which makes us deeply uncool, but also really cool. And my earliest memories of video games and our friendship was sort of built over weekends at your house, like bringing my memory card over, loading up each other's saves, and just trying to noodle out, find all the weird shit. Basically trying to, like, you know, platinum it before platinums were a thing, you know, finding everything we could and having a laugh about it, leveling up and finding little exploits. I'll always remember the famed weekend where I was quite under-leveled compared to you, and I went to the island closest to hell, which is the best place to level up in that game, and I got like 5 Odin summons in a row, which is a random one-hit kill summon, which basically is never so much experience, and you were so angry.
And then just went flying past my levels. And this was before we really had the understanding, kids, that on Final Fantasy VIII, it's actually better to be lower leveled and use all of your powers from junctions and shit. But back then, I was like trying to level my guys up, and Matt just went flying right past me with all those one-hit kills and stuff. And yeah, I was somewhat ticked off at that fact, but you know, Matt always, you know, you kind of had these situations where you're landing on your feet. But yeah, many years later, obviously we rectified the Final Fantasy VII, which we played after Final Fantasy VIII, but then I guess that shows, like, you know, that's kind of like a formative game that came out around that time that we were getting to friends in 1999, which, whew, oh boy, some distance there.
Yeah.
Matt, like, you're a guy who, you know, you've had a lot going on, a lot, you know, as a teacher, as a father and stuff. It's been, you know, the last few years, I'd imagine your life are pretty busy, but like in recent times, you've been back into playing a lot of games and stuff. So you've actually seen quite a lot of this last generation and some of the cooler shit that's gone on, right?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people, you dip out of interest. I think I dipped out of game. I mean, I say I dipped out of games. I mean, I had a PS2 and a PS3 and a PS4. Obviously, I got massively back into games around the PS4 era, just after Final Fantasy 15 come out. Previously to that, like on PS3, I'd only really played, say, you know, FIFA, the Final Fantasy 13 games, the Uncharted games, stuff like that. I kind of was very casual. And then from PS4, from the start of that generation, really, I've been quite heavily into it, again, like I was when I was younger. And now, you know, got the Switch, PS5, dual threat going on, so long may that continue.
Yeah, the Switch has been a cool bridge, actually, of like coming out a little later in the generation and still overlapping. Like, there's still excitement to be had about future Switch games, and I know there's like a Pro coming out, but that one's still, I think, going to carry on for a few more years. And yeah, like that portable element to the next gen gaming, has that been a big thing for you as well?
Yeah, initially it was. I mean, a few things have made gaming easier over the years. The portability of the Switch and being able to sort of play it on the couch is great. But I'll be honest, something that's really kept me engaged with sort of playing PlayStation a bit more when I'm sharing a house now is how good remote play is. Being able to stream my PS5 to my Mac, for example. I've got like a pretty nice size screen there to play PS5 from my couch, and people can still watch the TV and stuff. So. Technology's made it easier to slack off and play games, and long may that continue.
So Matt, we've done a little rundown here. The suspense time is over. What is your favourite game of the previous generation? What is the big hitter for you, my friend?
Can I give some honourable mentions first?
Absolutely, you can, sir.
Okay, so it won't surprise you from what we've already spoken about that JRPGs are my jam. They're what I play when I've got nothing else to play. I will always find them. And this last generation just gone has been like the second golden age of JRPGs after the PS1 glory days. There's been so many good ones this last generation. Octopath Traveler, Dragon Quest XI, games like that are really, really, really great and really enjoyable. And my love of JRPG is all consuming. It's what I always default back to, like I say, what I bravely default back to, you might even say.
Well, hey, there he is.
But so yeah, it won't be a surprise to know that my game of last generation is a JRPG, and it's a very, very special game. I think if I didn't have all of the nostalgic elements and the years of conspiracy theorizing about FF8 and FF7 with you, I think very much this probably would have been my favorite ever game, and that is Persona 5 Royal.
Now you see, Persona 5 is it's somewhat of an oversight for this here podcast because none of us played it, and it got a hell of a lot of good press. So sell us on the virtues of Persona 5.
I don't think it's a stretch to say Persona 5 Royal might well be the best JRPG that's ever been made in terms of the overall package of it. So I played it about a year ago, so it's not hot in my mind anymore. It's had chance to cool down. For me, it's a combination of all the things that make JRPGs great. So you've got fantastic combat, memorable soundtracks, good art. You've got excellent characters. You've got a really engaging, interesting narrative. You've got some fun little side diversions and great world building. And it does all of those things probably as well, if not better, than any other game in the genre that I've played. And it combines it all into one package. And, I could probably do a whole conversation with you on any one of those things. And I'd find personally very little to fault with it.
Yeah, I think when Final Fantasy has been as disappointing as it has been for like the last few years, it is cool that somebody is kind of holding that JRPG banner aloft. What are some of the fun little details that you like in Persona 5? Like little side missions, or like character or something, or just even the delivery of the way something happens.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes it really, really special is the way that they approach the characters. So in lots of games, there's good character development, but the character development is usually in step with what's happening in the plot. So that the plot develops the character. But what's really good about Persona, and it's the kind of thing that might turn a few people off, there is a lot of reading, and there's a lot of cutscenes and conversations, and you have to choose different options. There's the whole life sim aspect of it, which I think you either like or you don't like. I happen to think it was done really, really well. And it's just the depth of detail you get about the characters' lives, their motivations, their past lives, their aspirations going forward. And by the time you're done with the game, which, it's the Royal version I'm being very specific about because it has different updates to it that make it superior to the base version. But by the time you finish Royal, it's well past 100 hours just to finish the plot. And
Wow.
I felt that being a bit over dramatic. I kind of almost missed the group of characters, almost in the way that you do when you get to the end of a very long running TV show. And you don't often get that with a game because normally in games you don't quite get that level of personal depth and connection with the characters. And I almost felt sad when it was done.
Yeah, I know that feeling when you have so much fun in the world of a game and the characters and the way everything works, and you kind of reach the end of that spectrum. You're like, well, all these characters and all these things are here. They're still alive. I'm sure at some stage, you know, as much as you enjoyed it, you might replay it and stuff, but there's something really special about getting to the end of that game at the first time, but then having that feeling of just like, oh man, like, what do I do now? Like, I've conquered this mountain, but there's nowhere else for me to go.
Yeah, quite. And again, you and I both know that I've got a really big problem with the way video games end sometimes. I'm quite sensitive to endings that I don't like. And this is one of those ones that ended in a way that I felt was reasonably satisfying. And that's probably as high a praise as I can get, because I find endings of games quite difficult to judge generally. But it ended in a satisfying way. And I didn't feel like I had to go back and do New Game Plus to get more. I felt it was just enough, but I also wanted more, but I wanted more that was new, if that makes sense. Like I wanted to see what would happen next. And to say that and to not be bored of the music, particularly in a JRPG where the battle music is omnipresent, I was never bored of the music. I was never bored of the combat. I was never bored of the characters. After 100 odd hours, I just wanted it to carry on.
Yeah, I mean, like that is, it sounds like a stellar achievement. So, like, if you were, you know, in charge, you were the creative director of Persona 6. What do you think some cool things that you could do with the series going forward would be like? Is there anything that you would add, like any touches of quality of life for the next game, or, you know, any characters that you want to revisit or storylines you'd want to develop?
Yeah, I mean, a lot like the Final Fantasy series and the Dragon Quest series, none of the numbered sequels are direct continuations.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, there is a sequel, Strikers, which has come out this year in the West, which is a Muso style game, and the combat is not really my jam, but I'll almost certainly play it just because I want to, you know, spend a bit more time with those characters. But I'll be honest, when I didn't know if it was going to come out in the West or not, I already read the story, and it's like a little vignette, so it didn't really push it forward too much. So even though I don't like the gameplay, and I know the story, I'm still going to play it, which is probably a mark of how much that world left an impact on me. If I was going to do a genuine part 2, to be honest, mechanics wise, I probably would just leave it. I'd probably leave it exactly how it is. I think in terms of the narrative, though, I think it would be really cool to see a JRPG or another JRPG with slightly older characters. So much of the narrative's about them being teenagers rebelling against like the adult establishment. That's kind of like the gimmick of it. But sometimes, you know, JRPGs with more adult characters, you know, maybe like pushing into their 30s or whatever.
Yeah.
And then being part of the system that they wanted to destroy, and then seeing how that fits in, and maybe having a younger antagonist, for example, like going full circle would be quite interesting, because you can do interesting things with adults in those games. I was talking to you earlier, you know, I've been playing Yakuza 7, and the main party in there, I think like the average age of that party is about 40. And it's quite an interesting juxtaposition with what you'd normally see in that genre. So it'd be interesting to see them push that forward. But in terms of how they genuinely succeed in Persona 6, I think they're just going to have a real struggle on their hands to create a premise, a world, and a group of characters just as strong. I mean, I've got no doubt they'll be able to do the art and the music, because Persona 4's music was good too. But, you know, Persona 5's music was so good that I once stayed in the shop that sold me weapons for longer than I should have, just to jam out to that music, because it was, honestly, that bit of music's so good.
It's a bit like just people used to just put like the Wii Shop channel on in the background because they love the music so much, or one of those. But I think that's a great point you made about older characters. I think, so, you know, as both Final Fantasy fans, as mentioned, like, two of my favorite characters from Final Fantasy games are Auron in Final Fantasy X, who obviously helps Tidus out and was a friend of Tidus's father and has like that older connection to him, and Steiner in FF9. And you mentioned, like, you know, being a part of the establishment, and then that sort of existential crisis of, you know, did I always want to be part of this machine kind of thing. I think that's a very interesting POV to take, and dude, I would totally play your game, so you sold me.
Thank you,
Matt. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I've known your ass for a long time. I've respected your goddamn opinions for a long time, so it's fantastic that, you know, you should have had you on earlier. We had a Final Fantasy thing recorded. It fell through. It didn't quite work out, but we've rectified that now, and at some point in the future we'll have to have you back on to talk some Yakuza, talk some Persona, talk some JRPG goodness, my friend.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Top man. Thank you very much. And have a good rest of your day.
Hi all. Thanks so much for the invitation to talk about games, something I never really tire of doing. Well, I say thank you, but this request has prompted some seriously uncomfortable soul searching, so there is that, but... So, yeah, I'm immediately at risk of losing my credentials as an old head, but I think this last generation has actually been the greatest yet. I don't say that just because of graphical fidelity or the power of the hardware that we run our games on, though of course that's part of it, but because as a medium, the tools that we have available to make meaningful experiences have not only become more accessible, but also come into sharper and sharper focus, I think. There's always been great games, and there are games that were made 20, 30 years ago that are still superior to some of the most lucrative and successful games made today. But as a medium, we're more immediately eloquent now, maybe more confident than I think we've ever been. I've been blown away more often this generation by a simple application of an idea, a slight shift in the presentation of a well-worn mechanic than ever before. I've enjoyed the insularity of games that can refer to their own legend or the greater genre and show us how far we've come. I've enjoyed games that have blown me away with their innovation, and I've loved games that have drawn me in through the humdrum, the domestic, the everyday, and made me feel kind of a kinship with humanity. I just want to break to say I'm also a little perturbed by this whole favourite thing. If the internet has taught us anything, it's that liking things is both dangerous and dangerously subjective. I don't even mean the subjectivity between people, but like within ourselves. My favourite game today is not my favourite tomorrow. I think anyone who just finished an open world epic knows that the last thing they want to do is jump back into another 150-hour stat-based menu-heavy RPG. But that doesn't mean that that experience wasn't like the most important ever. So there are so many games that I could call my favourite of this generation. There are already so many games that I have called my favourite of this generation, but it's like today's just not their day. Some honourable mentions have to go to The Witcher 3 for scope, generosity, and an absolute masterclass in tone and world building. We also have to thank CD Projekt Red for a lesson in humility, showing that no amount of goodwill is an infinite amount of goodwill. I also have to mention Outer Wilds by Mobius Digital for giving me one of the greatest experiences in my entire gaming life. It could easily have taken the top spot here, and it's probably going to gnaw at me that it didn't for the rest of the week. Another great game that was really close for me is The Return of the Obra Dinn, which just makes me happy. Lucas Pope is a genius, and we should all be thankful that he's decided to use his powers for good, or we'd all be in a lot of trouble, I think. I could talk about Hollow Knight, Persona 5, Bloodborne, Disco Elysium. I mean, you could even go back and talk about Horizon Zero Dawn. I mean, we are spoilt. We are so spoilt. But the game that I am going to say was my favourite, because I suppose I should, even though it sits in the pantheon of many, many other games, is the tight, emotional platformer Celeste. I don't think it needs much of an introduction. Once a small Pico 8 game before being developed into its own fully fledged form, Celeste is nothing particularly new. It's easy to map its heritage from early Mario games through to Super Meat Boy. Even the year it came out, there were other difficult but rewarding platformers like The Messenger, Guacamelee 2 and Time Spinner. I mean, pixel art, even pixel art that looked that good, was a dime a dozen at that point, with Shovel Knight, Owlboy and Hyperlight Drifter being standout examples. And then the story, even with all its humanity, its relatableness, only puts it into a blossoming category of games that forsake their hero killing the big bad trope for something much more humble but complex. Kind of similar to games like Wonder Song, Night in the Woods, and more recently games like If Found. On paper, Celeste doesn't seem like anything new, but lots of games have great details, but Celeste is a great game in its totality. It is in the way that everything works together, discussing and probing the game's themes in unison. Eloquence for me isn't using long words, it's about effective communication, and Celeste says that what it wants to say perfectly. Not only is it a finely tuned platformer, arguably the greatest of all time, but its mechanic is quite literally the message. Climbing a mountain may be an obvious metaphor for what the game is about, but it's all the themes you get out of it, like perseverance and failure. Even success gets tempered the right way when you realise that, even after a particularly tricky set of obstacles, there's still more ahead of you. There's more that you need to overcome. To say that Celeste discusses anxiety and depression is to only look at its most overt story elements. What Celeste does is illustrate the journey needed to understand, face and consolidate those dark feelings. And that journey, though it may be played out by the character Madeline, belongs to the player as well. They may not be able to feel exactly what the developers had in mind, but through the power of interactivity, the game's mechanics effectively put the audience into the same space. You fail, you pick yourself back up again, and somewhere in that cycle is a revelation. Just as you fail again, there's a flicker of hope, a chance to succeed the next time. Personally, I think one of the most important moments in recent game history is the 2018 Game of the Year nominations. That year, Celeste, made by a small team who hung out in an apartment, competed with God of War, Spider-Man, Red Dead Redemption 2, Monster Hunter, and the latest Assassin's Creed. What was amazing is that Celeste 100% deserved to be there. Despite the fact that those games had been made by teams of hundreds with enough money to tank a small country, Celeste just sat there completely and fairly in the running. There's no doubt that Celeste took incredible talent, but it also shows us what the indie boom has really been about. You don't need a big budget or a big team to make one of the greatest games of all time. You just need to understand the medium and then find a way to leverage it to make a statement. Like other games nominated that year, Celeste looked inward at game culture, but also outwards to greater society. And while some of those games had to employ crunch to effectively communicate to the audience the realness of the characters and their emotion, Celeste managed to do it in broad strokes. The fact that Celeste has now been confirmed by the lead developer to have a strong trans narrative only solidifies how successful the narrative arc in this game is. The fact that it could speak to so many people while coming from a very specific set of circumstances shows how arbitrary the barriers that we put up can be. Even someone who has never suffered from depression or anxiety knows what it feels like to doubt themselves, to be overwhelmed by circumstances, scared to take a step while desperate to prove something. If I've made the game sound too pretentious, I'm genuinely sorry. If you want this game can just be a solid platformer with great music and pretty visuals, very, very pretty visuals. In fact, it's because it's all in such an unassuming package that it's so effective. So, I don't actually know what my favourite game this generation is. But if I had to choose an ambassador to communicate what games are, at their very best, I would absolutely choose Celeste.
So Mark asked me to choose one of my favorite games of the last generation. And for me, the choice was pretty easy to make. Stardew Valley is one of my favorite games, not only of the last generation, but probably, I wanted to say all time, but it would probably be in my top 10. Or, you know, I could go to 20. But no, I mean, it's one of my favorite games of all time. One of, not top 10, not top 5, but definitely in the top somewhere. It's great, in other words. It's one of my favorite games. And the reason why I chose Stardew Valley pretty quickly is because, you know, it relates to my love of organization in my life. And how it's like, when I wake up every morning, I like to think of how my day is going to go, and I organize that. And, you know, living with other people in this house, 9 times out of 10, that doesn't happen. It almost never happens. So, playing a game where the goal is you have to structure yourself, you have to plant crops, you have to harvest them, you have to talk to people, build relationships, go through the mines, all this stuff, and all this stuff requires you to go, okay, I'm going to do this at a certain time, then I'm going to move on to this, then I might have time for this, and it's gratifying to me. It's gratifying that I can have this kind of structure to where I can just organize myself and set what I want to do and do it. And that's the part of the game I like the most. And it's this whole strategy RPG farm simulator kind of thing that's always appealed to me, and that goes back to Harvest Moon. And obviously when you look at Stardew Valley, it's very faithful. It's very much based on Harvest Moon. And as somebody who played a lot of Harvest Moon, I played a ton of Friends of Mineral Town, which is on the Game Boy Advance back in like 2003. And I also played a ton of the GameCube game, which escapes my mind as to the specific name. But I played both of those games. They came out around the same time, and I played both of those a lot, and I was very big into the series at that time. And I read something right now as I was preparing to talk about this, that the creator of Stardew Valley was he wasn't as high on the series as he was previously prior to developing Stardew Valley. And I kind of felt the same way. I talk about those two GameCube games, but then after that, it's like a bunch of games that are just kind of there. They just kind of exist. So there wasn't, and there's Story of Seasons and Rune Factory and those kind of games, but there was nothing there that kind of like harkened back to the simpler days of Harvest Moon, and Stardew Valley is exactly that. It's a RPG. It's it incorporates all this stuff from Rune Factory and Animal Crossing and all these other life simulators that I also appeal to, because I mean, when you look at Stardew Valley and you look at this idea of, well, look at this nice quiet town where you can just go and fish, you can mine, you can talk to people who are flowing with empathy. And then you, especially in the last few years, for various reasons, both here and in the UK and Ireland and everywhere, it's like, wow, I wish a place like Stardew Valley existed. Because in this day and age, it's like empathy is nowhere. Empathy is dead. And here in Stardew Valley, I mean, you talk to any of the people, and yeah, there's some people with like some mysterious vibe about them, and then some people are crabby in general, but I mean, the overall feeling of the town is so appealing and so nice and so warm. And especially in the cutscenes when you see, there's one that always sticks out to me, and it's the one, and I'm bad with names, so forgive me for not remembering their names, but I remember one scene where the homeless guy in Stardew Valley was like going through trash in near one of I think the bar, the saloon, and the guy goes up to him, and instead of like yelling at him, he's like warm to him. He's showing empathy to him, and I thought, wow, that's actually so nice. And one of the other parts of the game that's so strong that isn't as much as you see in like the earlier Harvest Moon games, due to I guess you could say translations errors or lack of a good translation. I think you could say the script in this game is just top notch, like really, really well done. And I just like so much. I could talk about this game all day. I could talk about the soundtrack, which is just incredible. The graphics look so nice, and it's very much an open doesn't have like a story. I mean, it does, and it's kind of open-ended to what you can do. But there is this one part of the game where it's like you're supposed to collect. You have two choices. You can either go to the Joja Cola, I think it's called, and you could just keep giving them money until they take over the town. Or you can go to the community center and put in all of these items and make all of these items and continually try to build this community center until it's back to what it once was. And for someone like me who even today, I mean, I have a hard time clearing games and I have a hard time really sticking to games. I made an effort to make sure on one of these purchases, I bought this game on like every system. Every system except for maybe Xbox and mobile. I bought it everywhere else. And to clear the community center, to get all of those items, and to see the very nice ending, the very, very nice ending that I liked a lot. I mean, that felt incredibly warm. It felt very nice. So I have a lot of strong feelings on Stardew Valley. It's I like its warmth. I like the structure that brings. I like. There's not much I don't like. So I mean, one of my favorite games of this last generation is absolutely Stardew Valley. I highly recommend it if you haven't played it yet. I don't know why you haven't played it yet. It's one of the very much high-profile games the last few years. It's probably cheap now on Steam too because they have a bunch of sales, and it's everywhere. So I would definitely recommend it. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about it so much, it's a wonderful game. I definitely recommend it.
And welcome back to another segment of episode 200 of Link to the Cast, as we delve through the minds and souls of our guests, all of whom have a special place in our heart. And next up is a man I've known longer than pretty much anyone else I've ever met except my parents. He is a kick-ass drummer. He is a fragrance impresario. He is a funny son of a bitch. It's Matthew Biggs. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks, Jack, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely, mate. I think of all the people that I'm on this here episode 200, you would be the person that I probably have my first video game based memory with. So I was like, I have to get Biggs on straight away.
And we have to talk about it. I think yeah, that it probably was the first memory from video games, but I seem to remember those memories being filled with anger, rage, ab rollers, and walls, which will make no sense to any of your listeners, but yeah, it makes sense to us, right?
Yeah, Matt, what happened once when you ditched a combo on SSX3?
Yeah, that fucking combo on SSX, honestly, that game is such a son of a bitch. Literally, to combo all the way down a hill, down a mountain, you're doing fucking amazing. You get to the bottom and you fuck it, and there's an abs roller in front of you because you're trying to get fucking sick abs, right? When you're younger.
Absolutely.
You take that, and you take that abs roller, and literally I just crushed it against the wall. I couldn't use it again. I mean, it wasn't even mine, it was my dad's.
I love it. Ken's just kicking it, 10, 11 at night, getting a buzz on, maybe has a drink in his hand, sees JML, ab roller, he's like, I'll have one of those. Cut to a few weeks' time, Biggs bins a combo and absolute Smashville, USA.
Oh, God, that game. The thing is, though, yeah, as a kid, I was just super, when it came to video games, especially competition with you, more than anybody else, I just got super angry, when you just can't get it over the line. And look, that's the joy of competition. But these videos, oh god, SSX, god damn it.
But yeah, Matt. So what we're here to talk about is what your favorite game of the last generation was. Now, did you get to? I think as we get older and stuff, like it's harder to make time in our lives for things that we love, like video games or whatever. And me and you growing up, we played a lot of shit together, and I think we both maybe, like, I play a little less than I used to, but I know you probably play quite a lot less than you used to. So are there many games that you got to from this last generation?
Yeah, it's it's a difficult one. I was obviously thinking about it before I came on, and if I'm to think about the last decade, the game that I've picked, there are games that are like bigger and better than that I really did enjoy, like things like Red Dead Redemption as an example, prime example. Final Fantasy games, a massive fan of those, as you know, and like super immersive RPG type games. So I really enjoyed those. But I'll touch on your point that you went back to a minute ago, and time is the biggest thing for me. You just get a severe lack of it, obviously, growing up. And to be perfectly honest with you, I need something that's quick and easy to jump onto, and that go-to for me is just the Call of Duty series. In for the last decade, I've had pretty much all of them, most of them, I think. Obviously there's a bit between the two different companies that obviously bring them out on alternate years, right, and they play slightly differently, but I absolutely love it for a game where you can just quickly jump on and just have a go, really. You can do a 20-minute game, Warzone, really enjoy that, but well, sometimes it's like 5 minutes, depending on if you've got some hacking ass clowns that are just like all over the fucking shop at the moment. But yeah, that's my game.
Yeah,
Call of Duty.
I mean, it's a good choice, because for me, I wasn't that heavily invested in battle royales, and I'm probably going out on a limb as didn't assume that you would have played like Fortnite or Battlegrounds or any of that stuff. No. So all of a sudden we get this reinvention of the concept of the Call of Duty multiplayer. We get the battle royale framing, but with the quality of a Call of Duty shooter, and like it hit hard, man. Warzone, right?
Yeah, no, I think it really did. I mean, playing online like multiplayer Call of Duty for absolutely years, and that was always my kind of go-to, especially for quick games as well. This was a big game changer, but like to your point, yeah, bringing the Call of Duty kind of world into a battle royale was just like, oh my god, this is going to be amazing, and it bloody well was. It was friggin' amazing, and it still is. Concept, gameplay, love it. Love the new additions that are coming in. It's just the big issue is just the hackers right now. That's really, really spoiling the game for me and an awful lot of other people, which is not great.
Yeah, I see, like, within every week or two there's an article on Eurogamer. There's like another prominent Call of Duty YouTuber who's dropping out of the game, and like, is it at the moment, is it like something that it's almost like if you manage to pull off a win in Warzone at the moment, it means more, to steal a phrase from Liverpool.
Yeah. Look, it means so much more. And let's have it right. I'm not the world's greatest Warzone player. Most definitely not. My KDR is like 0.94. It's not even above 1. But, I go on because I enjoy playing it and I'm okay. And you know what? I can get a few 10 kill games over the line every now and again. And to your point on wins, I've got about, 30, 35 wins or something like that. So again, not a huge amount, but yeah, it means so much more now if you even get close to a top 10 with all of the hackers in the game. And, I can't even count the amount of times that I know I've been hacked just from spectating players after, and you can just see what they're doing. You're like, come on, guys, right? So you clearly can see where everyone is. You clearly can go invisible. You clearly can just shoot me from halfway across the map with a headshot perfectly, and now I'm out of the game. It's just really, it's really shitty, and I really hope that they kind of sort it out quick. I don't think they're doing a good enough job at getting it sorted, if I'm honest.
Yeah, but so when Call of Duty Warzone specifically is at its peak, what are some things that you love about the game? Because I remember when I was playing, just the tension of like getting towards those final circles and stuff was like really, really cool. And, thinking, oh, maybe we could do it, maybe this. But have you got any good memories, and what are things that you love about the game?
I love it when crazy stuff happens. Like you'll go through a period of time where you're like taking it super seriously, and you're like, look, I'm gonna get to the end. I'm rocking up with a squad who's pretty good, and you can tell by their gameplay if your gameplay is going to match theirs, and therefore you're like, yeah, I'm going to be serious now. I'm really try and think about strategy and get to the end. But then there's other times when you get paired with a bunch of absolute fucking clownfish who are just like, Jesus Christ, they just don't care. They go off. They don't follow orders. They're not on the mic. You ping up places to go, and they're just like halfway across the other side of the map. It's on those games where I tend to kind of veer off and just think, right, well, we're not going to get it over the line, so let's have a bit of fun with it. And usually it starts with find a helo and just see how many people I can chop up first, because that's always fun, right? You know, you just get a helo and just chop people up with the propellers. That's great. And the other great thing about it is it seriously pisses people off. And I love to hear the little reaction on the mic after you kill someone. Like, oh, no, he's got me with a chopper. Oh, guys, he's got a chopper. And you're like, yeah, guys, you know, you're on a squad. You can deal with the chopper if you're smart enough. Just get some fucking C4 or a grenade and lob it up, whatever you want to do. But, you know, that is really good. But then also there's just some other fun bits. When you have got a decent squad and you're kind of making it your way through to the end, I don't think there is anything more satisfying in Warzone than taking out a vehicle with an RPG. That is just the most satisfying bloody thing. And like, if I can do it as much as I can within a game, I will, because it's just so fun.
Yeah, I haven't played for a while, but there was a good while where that RPG like damage was so like OP that if you just hit the ground near a vehicle, you would just see the thing go up in flames.
No, seriously overpowered. It really was, honestly. But and they still are to a certain degree. You know, they're still just as effective. And I know a lot of people listen as well, be like, oh yeah, I don't like people who run with an RPG. But you know, I'll throw in there that I've got lots of different loadouts, and I'll kind of switch up dependent on what type of game I'm playing. But you know, every so often when I'm rocking a Growl RPG, I enjoy myself. I have fun, and that's what it's all about, right?
I think what you got into, and then like nicely was saying there, is that there isn't one way to play Warzone. There isn't a right way to play Warzone. There isn't a specific tactic that works every time. Like, you know, when we were playing it together, we would always try and like do tactics and stuff like that. And one game it would be successful, the next game you'd be dead in like 5 minutes. And to me, it's the constant variation that comes at you in all of the games that would keep you coming back time and time again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that obviously the game developers are doing, you know, like different variations within the game, putting little like new Easter eggs in there around, you know, there was this one that they did where you can kind of like work out loads of codes in City Hall and then get a train to a secret bunker and then get the Juggernaut. And then you can just like run round, and the Juggernaut, if for those of you who haven't used the Juggernaut, oh my god, it's so much fun. You just get a minigun, pretty much like sick health, and literally it rocks like some awesome rock music, like just comes over the mic, and you're just like, oh my god, this is so good. I just want to be the Juggernaut all the time. So they do lots of cool stuff like that. And the most recent one is they've done some like zombie breakout in a boat, which is like always quite fun as well.
Nice. So we got two more questions before we wrap up.
Yeah.
My first one is, now if I'm putting you in, you're basically Bobby Kotick, right? You're in charge of the whole of Activision right now, and you can demand for the next Warzone, the Warzone 2, whenever that does arrive, what would you like to see in the game that you think would make it better, or what would you do to improve it to like just add that little bit extra on top, other than obviously stop the cheaters, which is probably number one for everyone?
Yeah, obviously number one for everyone, yes. But taking that out of the equation, for me, I think it's like I'm a big fan of like ways to get about the map and using that to your advantage. So like they put the train in there recently. That's always quite cool. It creates a lot of attention on it initially, so you can get into some really good gunfights on the move, kind of like and I don't know, like some old western, reminds me of like Back to the Future type thing where they're on the train and that. But no, I would put in boats. I would put in boats that you can physically get in and kind of like drive around in. It's just, again, another dynamic. But how they get that to work, I'm not too sure. But without the map just becoming super huge and expansive that it's just crazy. But I think that's something that I'd probably look to put in there. That would be quite fun, I think.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. You get to like a D-Day landing style thing where they're like, they can see you out on the water in a boat and they're just waiting for you to come in, and you got to try and survive a hail of gunfire if you're landing this boat, or alternatively just like power the boat as fast as you can, crash it onto land, and see if you can skittle a bunch of dudes. Would be very satisfying.
Actually, use the back propellers of the boat, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just like spin it around. Yeah, or your helicopter chopping. Cool. Dude, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much, mate. Thanks for having me, and chat to you soon.
Ahoy there, Link to the Cast pals. It's me, your old pal, Cowboy Kevin, coming at you once again because I accidentally thought that you wanted to know what the best 3DS game was of last generation, and I didn't want you to think that I was being that obscure. So, last generation, which for many people, myself included, I'm pretty sure is just this generation, because Lord knows we're not getting new consoles anytime soon in this neck of the woods. But it's a very, very tough call for me. I mean, there's a lot of fabulous games that absolutely blew my mind, both from a story standpoint, from a gameplay standpoint, and as well from, I guess for lack of a better term, just from a cinematic blowing you away type of a standpoint. I mean, there's a lot of games I could list here, games that I absolutely enjoyed, absolutely adored. But there was only one game I can think of from the last generation which really tied together my love of puzzles, my love of story, genuinely breathtaking graphics, and for once in my life, a VR experience I could really get behind. I'm talking about Abduction from the makers, I believe, of Myst, one of the all-time classic confusing puzzle adventure games. Abduction is an absolute unsung gem of this last generation. It made me so excited to see what these guys will make next. And it stands head and shoulders, as far as I'm concerned, as a game that managed to take one of the absolute classic genres that fell by the wayside, give it a little bit of that current generation magic, and I really think that people should get their teeth sucked into it. If you really want a game that's going to challenge your brain, both from a puzzle standpoint and from a story standpoint, I can't recommend Abduction enough. I can't think of a game I had more fun playing, and I don't want to just say Breath of the Wild like everyone else, but if you don't like Abduction or you think that sounds a bit obscure, just edit this out so it says I said Breath of the Wild instead. I hope your podcast continues to go from strength to strength as we head into the uncharted territories of this alleged current generation of consoles.
When I was tasked with the act of choosing Game of the Generation, my immediate thought went to Wind Waker HD because, of course, I would choose a HD remake of a GameCube game. That's the natural thing to think about when you think about the best game of a generation. I then veered into Breath of the Wild because it is like the best game ever made, but somebody's gonna choose Breath of the Wild, right? I'll be so upset if nobody chooses Breath of the Wild because the only reason I didn't choose Breath of the Wild was on the basis that surely somebody else is gonna choose Breath of the Wild, right? So if no one else chooses Breath of the Wild, it's a good game, you should go play it. Then I thought a lot about Bloodborne, because it's a game that I both hated with a vehement passion, and then ended up loving. So I think there's really something special about a game that you can hate that wins you over in the end. And then I flirted a little with Night in the Woods, which I think is the best written game of this generation, and a game that has a sense of atmosphere and a sense of personality that no other game this generation has. But in the end, after great deliberations, and thinking about many other games, I decided Game of the Generation is Super Mario Maker. While the Wii U's trials and tribulations are well covered ground at this stage, the console was a commercial flop, but had a lot of cool games. And one of those cool games was the game that I think, if they had released within the first year or so of its console life cycle, would have been the Wii U's killer app, and that's Super Mario Maker. I really do think that no game told you exactly what the Wii U was, and why it was cool, better than Super Mario Maker did. Even Nintendo Land, which is actually a really cool game that uses the gamepad in really cool ways, is still like one of those weird 1-2 switch test games where like all of the games are fun and fine, but none of them are like revelatory or like Wii Sports level conceptually changing what you think a video game can be. Whereas Super Mario Maker is the game that was made for the Wii U. Like, no other game used that Wii U gamepad better than Super Mario Maker, because it's a game about making Mario levels. And if it was released within that first year of the Wii U console, I think people would have gotten it. I think people would have been like, oh, that's why this piece of technology is cool. Even though the actual technology itself was actually quite limited, and it was the console that walked, so the Switch could eventually run. But when you play Super Mario Maker on Wii U, when you use the gamepad, when you use the stylus, when you just want to cozy up and make a level, or when you want to pop it up on the big screen and play through it, or when you want to bounce between both when you're testing stuff, I don't think a game has better matched the technology it's on since Wii Sports. So Nintendo, you really should have just released Super Mario Maker within a year. That should have been your killer app. It was too late when you released it in 2015. I was very excited for Super Mario Maker because I'm not like a game design guy. I was never like, I'm going to make a game someday. I'm not that creative. Whereas the idea of making a Mario level was super approachable because it's 2D, it's left to right, everything is right there in front of you. I've played enough Mario games that have a decent feel for what a good level and a bad level feels like in a Mario game, even though I still, if you go back and play either my Super Mario Maker 1 or 2 levels, made lots of bad Mario levels. So even though like I'm not the kind of guy that was always like, I want to make a video game, this game piqued my interest. I mean, more than I thought it would going in. Because going in I thought, alright, this is an endless well of Mario levels, and some of them will be garbage, but some of them will be masterpieces and the kind of levels Nintendo themselves would not ever make. Whereas when I got my hands on it, I was like, I want to play with these tools more than I thought I would. And I have more ideas for levels than I thought I would, which is not something I expected to happen, even though this is the last game I bought online to be delivered, as in like a physical copy. And the reason it's the last one is because this game came 3 days late. I bought the collector's edition, which I think had like a stylus, and it came with a t-shirt, and it was late. It was 3 days late, and I was very upset that it didn't come on the launch day. So right then and there, in that moment, when Super Mario Maker was 3 days late, I vowed never again to order a physical copy of a video game online. And I still haven't done it since. I have gotten physical copies to collect in stores and whatnot, but I want my games on launch. How many different tangents am I going to go off on talking about Super Mario Maker? Yeah, either way, but the point of this story is that because it was 3 days late, and I wanted to start making levels, I started like watching videos, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, the like cultural phenomenon that surrounded this game, or at least the cultural moment it had. I started drawing my levels on like graph paper. I literally went out and bought graph paper to start drawing my Super Mario Maker levels and actually like planning them out in advance. So if you're good at jumping equals win, which I believe was the name of my first Super Mario Maker level, I drew that. I planned it out. I had to change the title because I didn't have enough characters to say if you're good at jumping you'll win, so I had to do if you're good at jumping equals win. Speaking to the limitations of that game, actually fostering further creativity, because it does have like entity limits and all that, and you have to work around those, and you have to be clever about it, and you have to use your resources smartly and not just throw everything at the screen you can possibly throw at the screen. So yeah, I drew out my levels, I created them, I tweaked them, I tested them, and I was like, I did not expect that to happen with me. I did not expect to dive into the creation aspect of this game as much as I did. But then there's also the flip side, there's the levels, and as I said, there's people that made things in this game that Nintendo would just never do in Mario. The kind of puzzle levels, the kind of troll levels in Mario are just, there is an art to a Mario Maker troll level that's not just thwomp drops from off screen. And go dig into the YouTube subculture of troll levels and you will find great joy, because there is creativity in abundance in them. And all the kinds of like weird machines and the auto levels that play themselves that just sadly became the scourge of the freaking popular levels. And you would think eventually people would get tired of the levels that play themselves, but no, they keep throwing stars at those levels that play themselves. Even in Super Mario Maker 2, that annoyed me. It's like, surely you've had enough of these levels that played themselves in Super Mario Maker 1, because the first, 5 of them are cool back in 2015, and then people still frickin' loved them on the frickin' Switch version. Duh, terrible. The kind of contraptions and creations and quizzes and music levels that people can make within these tools, the kind of things you just wouldn't think these tools are capable of. People made functioning calculators, and I said I was going to mention the cultural moment that surrounded this game. Just the first 2 months after release, where people were unleashing their monstrosities upon the world, unleashing their Kaizo levels, their super hard, difficult but well made levels, unleashing their just hot garbage, unleashing their pure unbridled creativity, challenging each other. Like that moment for the first like 2 months after this game came out, and then, you know, like the Super Mario Maker sub community that has sustained even to this day, seeing the creativity in those levels just blew my mind. And still blows my mind to this day, because I'm one of those guys who still watches like Mario Maker levels and best Mario Maker level videos, and it does legitimately amaze me to see people making things that still like blow my mind. That I'm still like, I did not think that could be made in this game. Even Super Mario Maker 2, which is, you know, it has new items, new options, new themes, but even then, a lot of the core things that were still in the original game are still being remixed and reused in ways that I didn't think was possible. And that's so cool that Nintendo would turn their tools over to the community and just say, go nuts. It's a very un-Nintendo thing to do, which I think is what made this game so interesting. It's also one of the very rare games that is much better on Wii U than it is on Switch. Like, the gamepad was made for this game. It just made this game intuitive and easy to use, and Nintendo got so much about like the user tools right, and the way you can swiftly test and move in and out of testing and like see where you went wrong, and that all that is real time, and it's fast, and it's easy to use, and it's intuitive, and they reworked it as best they could on Switch, and it works on Switch, but it's just not the same. It doesn't have the same feel as it did on Wii U. As well as like the Wii U version had amiibo costumes, which is the substitute for creativity in my case, where it's just like, I'm just going to make a level themed around a Pikachu costume and get lots of likes that way, because I don't have to come up with unique, clever level ideas that way. I can lean on costumes, music, and nostalgia. It also makes me think a lot about the future of 2D Mario, because we haven't actually gotten a new 2D Mario game since the first Super Mario Maker came out. We got New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, and we haven't gotten a new one since the 3DS game, New Super Mario Bros. 2. That was the name of the 3DS game, wasn't it? The one about coins, yeah. I'll be very interested to see what Nintendo's next 2D Mario game looks like. Because they turned the tools over to everybody, you would think, surely they can't make another one, but I kind of want to see them make another one now, just to see, can they top the community? After the community has thrown all this creativity and magic at these tools, Nintendo have to raise their game now. They can't just churn out like New Super Mario Bros. U Switch Deluxe with Toadette, Peach, whatever. What was the name of the Bowsette? That was the name of the character that everyone got horny for a hot minute there. They can't just churn out the same old Mario format. It'll feel tired. It'll feel not nearly as creative as the user-generated content in their other games. So I'm hoping the next 2D Mario is one of the bigger jumps 2D Mario has ever seen in terms of like visuals and creativity. Or they'll just make another boring one and it'll sell 15 million copies, and who cares? But we are reaching the stage where Nintendo will be turning the servers off for uploading levels for Super Mario Maker on Wii U, so I think it's a fitting tribute now for me to talk about it in the terms of Game of the Generation, nearly 6 years after release, as this tool that fostered creativity within the user, and it was only as good as you were willing to put into it, which is a fascinating approach for a game. The tools were as intuitive as any level designer I've ever used. I tried to make Little Big Planet levels. It was a disaster. Dreams is a very versatile tool in which you can do a lot of things, but it has a much higher skill level required than Super Mario Maker did. It was so approachable. It was so easy to use. It was so easy just to get your ideas down there and test them and experiment and see what works and what doesn't work. I really do hope that there's a generation of game designers in like 10-15 years who are like, my first inspiration for making a game came from getting my hands on Super Mario Maker, and then I wanted to expand my horizons beyond that and make something much more ambitious and cool. I think those stories will happen, and that may be the legacy of this game. But regardless, it is my game of the generation because it fostered a creativity in me that I did not know was really there. And also, it's just an endless supply of great Mario levels. What more could you want? You could just play Mario forever. Also, an aside, looking at the Mario Bros. And Mario World and Mario 3 in HD was so good. It looked so pretty. So Super Mario Maker 2015 on the Wii U, Game of the Generation.
Hello, Ryan Brown here, perhaps better known on Twitter and the internet in general as Toad's Anime. I was very kindly asked to give my opinion on the best video game of the generation, which in previous generations will have been an incredibly difficult pick for me. I've always been one of these people that felt they didn't necessarily have a favourite game, and if someone asked me my favourite game, I'd name like 10, 20 games, which I'm sure is the case for a lot of people. I could easily have chosen Kingdom Hearts 3, because just how much that series meant to me as a teenager. That was the series that I would say pushed me into becoming a quote-unquote gamer. It meant so much to me as a kid. It gave me friends, genuinely lifelong friends I still have now. I had post-it notes stuck up on my wall of quotes from the games. Kingdom Hearts 2 was the first game I ever pre-ordered and purchased with my own money. That series means a lot to me. I managed to interview Tetsuya Nomura in the US, literally a childhood hero. So that game to finally happen, big deal for me. Still absolutely love it. However, it's not my game of the generation. I could also easily have said Super Mario Odyssey. I think it's the greatest 3D platformer ever made. Even someone that grew up with and loved many Mario games, it's definitely the best. Heck, I would say it's the best game Nintendo's ever made, in my opinion, which is insane. It's just that good. But neither of those are the game of the generation for me. My game of the generation is, in fact, Nier Automata. It's just amazing. I may be the only person in this podcast that names that game, but also I might not be. I feel like it's one of those games that I guess doesn't have huge mainstream appeal, but it's sold millions of copies, far more than it was expected to, and has a hardcore base. And the people that love this game really love this game, myself included, and for good reason. It's a spin-off / sequel to the Drakengard series, which started on the PS2. A lot of my favorite games seem to have some sort of childhood ties to it, and this is the same. The spin-off sequel, the original game, was the Drakengard series, and I grew up with Drakengard. I grew up with Drakengard 1 and 2, adored them. I think I've always had an affinity for hack and slashy type gameplay, way back to how I first started playing games. That seems to be like actiony hack and slashy games seem to be my favorite kind of games. And the Drakengard series had all that and had a great story, but it was also kind of clunky. And so when the original Nier happened, which sadly, for whatever reason, when it came out on the PS3, I simply didn't play. It was not panned, but it was well received for its story, its music, but people generally felt they felt that the combat was clunky. So for Nier Automata, they brought on Action Masters, Platinum Games, who created series such as Bayonetta, Mad World, Vanquish, just stellar action games, like top of their game. And so to combine the incredible story that Yoko Taro is able to make with the Drakengard games and the original Nier, combine that with the pure class action gameplay that Platinum Games put out, and it's not hard to see why then, if you're into those kind of elements, like a really intricate story, great music, great action combat, if you're interested in those elements, Nier Automata is just magnificent. It's not just my game of the generation, it's actually my favourite game of all time. I've not felt during my adulthood at all that I have one of those, and yet here I am saying Nier Automata is my favourite game of all time. When it came out, I wasn't expecting that much. I just was so happening to review it for the Mirror at the time. And I started playing it, and anyone that's played it knows that you have that sort of shoot 'em up first level, and I was like, oh, here we go. And ended up being my favourite game of all time. Just the way in which it uses video games as a medium to tell its story is something that isn't done often enough. Obviously, no spoilers for those who haven't played it, but even just small things like at the beginning of the game, when you're doing the settings for the game, that has like a story, like a video game element to it. Like that has an explanation in game for you setting the sound and the brightness and stuff. At any point during the game, you can go into your settings, and because you're an Android, you can remove like a power chip from yourself, which ends the game. Like it blows you up, just the end of the game. And it's just things like that are throughout the game. in far more potent ways than that even. It uses the method of video games to tell its own story, which is incredibly unique. And of course, like, another thing is that the game kind of has its own sequel inbuilt, which is insane. Like, there's 3 acts, and the 3rd act is effectively like the game's own sequel. Like, you play through the game twice as different characters, and then it's a completely different story afterwards. And the game rewards you for doing that, and the credits scene from that is probably one of the most memorable moments in gaming for me. The amusement park boss, again, probably one of the most memorable moments in gaming for me. The soundtrack is probably the best soundtrack ever made for a video game. Even if you're not interested in this game, I highly recommend checking out the soundtrack, listening to some of its tracks. It is incredible. So that's my game of the generation. I've played many games across the PS4, Switch, and so on over the last gen, but that one tops it for me. It is a very, very, very special game.
And welcome back, episode 200, Link to the Cast, where we're getting the views of our esteemed colleagues and friends and other video game consigliere on what their favourite game of the last generation is. And with me today is a guest, a man who I've known for probably around a decade now, from back in the day of going to wrestling shows and stuff. Anyway, he's a K-pop impresario, he's a meme creator, he is a hilarious internet presence. Is Iain Seaton. Iain, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, friend of the show.
Yes, you are, in fact, a friend of Link to the Cast and have been for many, many a year. And
I used to get so many mentions on the show, and it's dwindling away as the years go on.
Are you taking shots right now?
No.
We reach out to you. I'm like, yeah, why don't you come on for episode 200? The first thing you start doing is cutting a
prize,
promo.
motherfucker.
Yep. Okay. So episode 300 is your next mention on this here show. Yep. So, buddy, like, I've known you for, as I say, just about a decade, and you know, we talk about a lot of stuff. We talk about music, we talk about movies, we talk about wrestling. In terms of video games, what are some memories and stuff of me and you that playing video games that we've had?
When we were at more than friend of the show, host of the show, Dave Ryans, and we were playing was, I think, your introduction to Gang Beasts,
Yes.
and my second or third time playing it, which is, I think, the hardest I've ever seen you laugh in my entire life. I don't think I've ever seen you laugh louder than when it was that level where it's like a subway and the train keeps coming, and we just like could not figure out how to throw each other off of, like, it was basically one of us running up to the edge of the platform, I guess, and then just standing there while the other person flailed about for a second, and then kind of swapping. So Gang Beast is the main one I remember from you, and I think we just kind of generally discuss, kind of not very in detail, but like anything you've been playing, and I pretend that I've played them when I've actually just watched like a Twitch streamer play through it, and I'm like, oh, I know all about The Last of Us Part 2 when I watched Grand Pooh Bear play through that. It was so emotional I was at the end of watching that.
Yeah, like, you've been a huge Giant Bomb fan and stuff for years. Like, I know we talked a bunch about that stuff, but yeah, the Gang Beast thing is, I remember that vividly, and ended up being our favorite multiplayer game of that year, which I think angered probably Sean McGee, because it was probably a much cooler game that we could have picked. Therefore, he is going to be in charge of our multiplayer direction for next year, I think.
There is not a cooler game than Gang Beasts.
Yes, Gang
Even
Beasts.
The title, a gang of beasts.
I know, exactly.
There's not a cooler game than that.
So, in terms of like your video gaming output for this last generation, what things have you played? Have you gotten to many things, and how has your sort of gameplay wavered up and down over the last couple of years?
So yeah, as you said, I basically, for a while, a long time ago now, probably just before I knew you actually, a lot of my personality was based around the fact that I loved Giant Bomb a lot. So it's kind of more, I think I might have the most knowledge about video games of anyone who doesn't play that many video games. Like, I know all about them, and I can tell you intricacies about them. And there's just whole swathes of fucking games that I just like. I don't think I've ever finished a first-person shooter game ever. I can't. There's something about the switch from when you had one analog. This is crazy. The switch from when you had one analog stick to two. I cannot, I can't aim the gun, and I can't aim the gun and aim my face at the same time. So I'll just be standing still, getting wrecked as my brothers are playing like zombies on like college. I remember Xbox 360 era. My brother Callum, who plays no games at all, he was like, "There's this zombies game on Call of Duty. Come and play it." And he just wrecked me over and over and over again. He was like, "Ian, why do you have all the consoles and you can't even play any of these games?" And it's just like I build myself up to play all these games, and like people hype them, and then Jeff Gerstmann tells me I should play it, which, I mean, these days he doesn't really. Jeff Gerstmann says maybe I should think about doing something, but and then I just kind of bounce off them. So it takes quite a lot for me to actually get lost in a game and fully engage in it. So there's only a few, even from the last generation, that I finished. Never mind, kind of went to 100%. So do you want me to tell you what my favorite one was?
Yes.
Okay.
We're looking for your favorite game of the last generation.
Okay.
And like, from what you're saying, it has to be a pretty special game to have not only got you to want to play through it and not just watch Winnie the Pooh Bear play it on twitch.tv.
He got so sad he was almost crying.
Yeah.
And by proxy, I was almost crying watching that bit at the end.
Didn't have his jar of honey, and sometimes he loses it. Like, what can you say? Why is he only wearing a half shirt as well? It's like, get a full shirt, son, and no trousers. Better, yeah, I mean, why did they even let him on Twitch? I don't know, but yeah. What's the one that really hit home for you in this last gen and was special after you've just no-sold your video game abilities?
Yeah. So all of the games. I have a PS4 and I have an Xbox 360 and Xbox One S. I use the Xbox One S to watch things like The Rock and Con Air on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray. I don't really use that to play any games ever. And I think the PlayStation gets so little use that every time I switch it back on, it's been sitting in sleep mode and has to rebuild the hard drive every time, because it's like, it's failed, you've not used it for like 6 months, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's none from them. I use my Switch quite a lot. And I was going to say Hades because I picked up Hades roundabout when it came out. And again, with the Giant Bomb Link, a lot of Supergiant stuff kind of feels near and dear to my heart because I've kind of followed them all the way from Bastion up until now. I thought Hades was easily Supergiant's best game. I absolutely loved it. But the one game that I adored, and the thing that happened to me that doesn't happen very often, where I sit down to play a game and I say I'll play it for half an hour or so, and then suddenly it's like the middle of the night and I've missed like 3 meals, was Mario Odyssey on the Nintendo Switch. I thought it was unbelievable.
A man after my own heart. I loved Mario Odyssey to a great degree. Yeah. And yes, it has that effect with, I remember Mark at the time, one of his criticisms was that there was just too many shines and stuff in the game, but that's kind of what leads you down the path of, I'm going to play it for half an hour, it's 4 hours later, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, it feels, because of that, it feels almost like a natural evolution of, if you're looking at the through line of Mario 3D platformers, I guess, that is kind of one game on every generation that I'll just get lost in. Like, I mean, Mario Sunshine aside, I played that a bit, but it's not the best. But like 64 and Galaxy and even 3D World, Land, whichever one was on the Wii U.
3D World, yeah. They've just remastered and brought out for Switch, by the way, if you want to pick that up.
Yeah, I saw with the Bowser's Fury, which I watched Grand Pooh Bear play all the way through, and it seemed lovely.
Him and Eo just kicking it.
Yeah, they had a great time. No, but Odyssey feels like just a natural progression of that, and it feels like it perfected. Yeah, I'll say perfect. It feels like it perfected kind of everything they've been going for prior to that, and that it's not an open world, but all of the levels are kind of so vast that it feels like you've got you don't feel like it doesn't really feel like you're jumping in and out of levels so much as you're kind of exploring different open worlds, I guess, and then traveling between them just because of how big the levels are. And yeah, I mean, the thing with the moons, it can, once you've finished the game and you're kind of trying to collect them all, maybe it gets a bit of a nuisance after that. But the actual core experience of playing through those levels, finding the moons that you can, and then going to fight Bowser and unlocking kind of the extra stuff after that is all just it just felt completely flawless to me. I don't think I would change a single thing about that experience.
Yeah, I agree. It's just one of those games where it is, like you say, the perfect distillation of what you kind of want from a Mario platformer, and something that I think that they were definitely getting onto it with the Galaxy games. I think the Galaxy games are fantastic, but to me, it just had the immediacy of Super Mario 64 and all of the things that I liked about Galaxy, and then like here it was in this package, and it came out the same year the Switch came out, when we'd already had like one era-defining game, and to have that in the same year, to have Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey in the same year, like I don't think Nintendo will ever release. It'll be a long time before we get two games that good in the same year again, right?
And they've probably kind of suffered for it since, because they kind of shot their load twice in one go, and then they've kind of had nothing else since. But
like maybe here's Skyward Sword, or here's all those old era games you like, but you can only buy them for a little while.
Yeah, it's basically those two games, and then all the old indie games that you'd never played before, Ian, is what I have on my it's what I have on my Switch. But the thing I really liked about Mario Odyssey is, or one of the main things I really liked, is probably my favorite game ever, is Banjo-Kazooie on the N64. And the thing that I liked about that more than Mario 64 is the fact that you enter into a level and then you can just go around and solve everything inside that level. Mario does the thing where you get the star and it pops you back out and you have to jump back in. And I understand they did that because they were kind of resetting the level for different scenarios, but I always loved how immersive it felt in Banjo-Kazooie, where you were just jumping in, and then apart from a couple of little things where you would have to go and get abilities later on and things like that, you're just basically free to complete that level as in whatever order or as however you please. And the Mario Odyssey felt like that, but on like a much like a 1,000 times the scale of what the level sizes in Banjo-Kazooie felt like. And it was just, I didn't ever want to leave. I entered the world and like I didn't ever want to leave the world, and then you go to the next one and you're like, oh, I don't ever want to leave this one either. And it just over and over again until you're fighting Bowser at the end, and then that fucking song plays that's the catchiest song you've ever heard in your life, and you're running about punching through blocks as Bowser. Spoilers for, how old is that game?
4 years now.
Spoilers for Mario Odyssey. You can possess Bowser and run about, and it's awesome.
You can.
But yeah, everything about it. Those two songs with lyrics in it, it's just, those are two. I would listen to those songs as standalone songs, even if they weren't in Mario games, and then it just fits along with what you're actually doing at the time so well. Everything about it is so great. I know people are seem to be kind of, as we go along, cooling off on it, and I don't really understand why.
No, if anything, I just kind of think of my time I spent with it even more fondly now, because I haven't played a platform. The only thing that really has given me the same vibes I've played in recent times is Astros, right? Yeah. And nothing else has come close. So I think back to the experience I had with Mario Odyssey and just how much I genuinely loved it. And yeah, it just keeps it there. So 2 questions left to ask you, sir. If you were in charge of Nintendo, which would be a pretty sweet job, let's face it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty damn good role. if you were going to do a sequel to Mario Odyssey, what do you think that you would do with it, and what is something new that you'd maybe like to introduce that you think would be pretty cool to sort of? I mean, it's hard to elevate it because it's such a great game, but something in there that you would add to make it more to your liking.
I think so. In my head, it's kind of jumbled between. I would prefer, and I always do prefer, in 3D platformers like that, which are my favorite type of games, by the way. But I always prefer having like a physical hub world that you can run through to get from level to level, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
As opposed to the ship that you're just selecting levels. So I think looking at what they did with Bowser's Fury, I think probably trying to make that more of an open world is probably the way to go. My concern would be that that balls things up, but then I mean, it was cool from what I could see watching people play it. It was cool in Bowser's Fury, and the parts that I did play of Breath of the Wild, which I also liked a lot. You know, I wouldn't have imagined people would have thought that running Zelda as an open world game like that would have had the spectacular results it did there either. So I think probably opening it up a bit and still having these massive kind of cordoned off areas maybe, but having a larger interconnecting area in between it probably would be the way I would go. And maybe kind of make it so that you can't just buy moons and then nobody knows how many moons there actually are. That's possibly a bit of streamlining there would maybe help. I think even thinking about it now, even if they just made it almost exactly the same, and just if any new worlds were as inventive as the ones were in Mario Odyssey, then I would be happy to play that.
Dude, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
For coming on here. This is something that again I feel like is overdue and trying to get you on, and even though you you totally buried your ability to play games, your knowledge of them is at least second to none.
It's very strange. It's one of the weirdest things about me that I know everything about the games and barely touch the things.
Hey, look, I know a hell of a lot about football. I couldn't fucking hit a pass 10 yards and have it go to a man. So
it feels like false equivalency, but we'll go with it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, strike up a rapport with you here.
Thank you
Someone
for
who's
making me
already
feel
my
better.
friend.
Thanks, Jack. I really needed that today.
But yeah, man, thanks for coming on the show.
No problem.
You have a good rest of your day, my friend.
You too, Jack. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Bye.